And we are live with our 289th episode of Absolute AppSec. I am Seth Law at Seth Law on social media, joined today by a very special co-host, the return of Stefan Logical, at Logical on all the social medias. Stefan, say hi.
Hi. You were just waiting for
Okay.
that. You love that,
Yeah.
so that you don't have to always be the one that gets the Seth say hi.
Seth, say hi. Stefan, say
Yeah.
hi. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say hi from now on, right? Yeah, whatever. That's gonna work out well for me. I did want to just run through a couple of items before Steph and I kick off our discussion today. First things first, Ken and I will be giving a virtual practical secure code review training on July 17th and 18th. If you have not had the opportunity to learn manual code review, and we're going to get into this a little bit later today, this is your opportunity to do that. Training.absoluteappsec.com. In addition, we will be giving our Harnessing LLMs for Application Security course at DEF CON this year. So that's after DEF CON. That's DEF CON training. So training.defcon.com. Yeah, I believe so, or .org, something like that. I should both. I don't have the link right in front of me because I'm all thrown off today. But you can find it there at training.absoluteappsec.com as well, a link to that training. That one's going to be really good if you have not used LLMs before from an agentic perspective, from just throwing out AppSec style questions at an LLM and being able to toolify it, for lack of a better term, right? Use LLMs in your tool suite, in your process. What we're starting to do at Redpoint, and that's one of the discussions that we're going to have today. Let's see. There we go. Look at that. Look at that. Somebody's given me links to post, like I normally do for someone else. So
Yeah, exactly.
That.
Oh, goodness.
Yep. Good call. Okay, so if you are looking for training, you want to level up your either manual code review skills or your ability to use LLMs, from a programmatic perspective, to improve your AppSec skills and your AppSec pipeline. These are your opportunities to do that. And yeah, otherwise, Stefan, welcome back to the show. I know life for you has been very busy. You've moved around a fair bit. I can't remember the last time we had you on the show. I should look and see. But give us a short rundown of what's been going on in your world before we dig into all the things AI.
I don't think I think I was at this house, but yeah, moving, lots of moves around. I am doing vulnerability management and vulnerability research now. So it's a little bit of a shift. Yeah, I mean, just me, Seth. I like to bounce around and do different things, try different things, all over the place here. So,
Yep.
Mostly just been bouncing around. Obviously, doing some side work on things. Going back and forth on like my programming language and things like that. Obviously, trying to keep up with all the fun in like the supply chain space, LLMs, that sort of thing. So it's fun, the usual things here.
The usual things here. Yeah. To Robert's point, when haven't you been doing vulnerability research? I'm pretty sure that's what you and I bonded on however many years ago when we started talking as it is. So, overall, not surprising. And I just checked, the last time you were on was actually early 2024. So it's been over a year.
Wow.
Looks like it was another time that Ken decided to abandon me. So appreciate you supporting, come on,
of course,
helping me run through all the things. Well, that's good, right? vulnerability research, you've moved, you're helping. I know you've built out multiple red teams over the last couple of years for various organizations, vulnerability research on top of that. Um, with that though, like my initial question is what in that is exciting to you, right? Like what is it that, what's drawing you to vulnerability research right now as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago, like the discussions that we were having?
I think now what's fairly interesting, especially in my current role, is I'm doing a lot. I'm not quite at Jerry Gamblin's level, right? But I'm doing a lot of like vulnerability data intake and processing, triage, massage, watching a lot of teams how they actually use the vulnerability data internally, and then also looking at like our trends and things like that. Like that's fascinating too, right? But at the same time, still being able to reach down into code and find things, point things out, see how bad they actually are for us, maybe come up with proofs of concept, that sort of thing. It's a very fascinating space. I've never really, like in the past, I've obviously seen CVEs, right? Like it's predicated for our job to be able to see CVEs. But I think looking at a larger portion of the landscape and sort of consuming large amounts of feeds of data is interesting to me. Having like a 250 gig vulnerability data lake lying
Yeah,
around for stuff that's not just like npm, a single copy of npm, is fun to have. And so it's been interesting to sort of like go deeper into vulnerability management and technical vulnerability management, but also looking at the sort of like where vulns lie, how they impact, what the actual technical risk of those things are, designing proofs of concept, that sort of thing. So it's interesting. It's different from like the pure red team work that I've done previously, right? Like when I was at GitHub, obviously we would weaponize things. We would find,
yeah,
0 days, old days, whatever it was, and use them. We like a lot of abusive functionality. That's still fascinating. But what's interesting about being in like the public vulnerability space is it's much more widely applicable, right? There's a lot of, if you find a vuln in one place, it's like seeing how that can land in other places is fascinating, and also just the sheer amount of stuff that's out there. There's so much crap. Similar to the supply chain space too. There's a lot of like people who put out fake weaponized vulnerabilities scanners and things like that. So it's a ton of fun. It's really interesting to like be closer to sources there and sort of processing things. So it's fun.
yeah, yeah. Like so what I'm getting is kind of these overall trends that are happening in these large sets of data, or looking at it from a holistic perspective instead of just the single, one-off. Um, okay, we have a vulnerability in this public library, this package that's been exploited. We're actually using that from a red team perspective to show our value, right? Whatever it is, or to make sure that the organization is responding appropriately. But when you're looking at it from a larger perspective, so you're talking vulnerability data, not necessarily um, not just supply chain, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
libraries and dependencies, but overall vulnerability data, which is a larger set that you have to be interested in. That there are, yeah, that there are things that we should be concerned about. And so, like, what I'm kind of driving towards here is, okay, like we started from an application security perspective. That's definitely what the podcast's about. Like, that's what we talk about on a weekly basis. But how do we take that into account? Because when we're talking about vulnerabilities in the wider context, it means that we're also considering vulnerabilities that don't always touch on the code per se, at least like the code that we're developing or we're looking at for an organization. So how do you take that into account? Like how do you reconcile that or protect against that sort of a threat when we are so narrowly scoped?
I mean, I think there's a few things. Having a real great sense of like where the system is, right? Context matters, and having
Yeah.
a really great understanding of like where does this component live, what is its exposure. Um, I think the biggest thing that I've seen, and we all like to rag on CVSS, right? Like CVSS is bad, it doesn't encode things, etc. But what I find fascinating is that so frequently we don't actually use any of the CVSS modifiers. So, for example, like there's modified attack vector, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, so it's actually not network for us; it's adjacent because of whatever compensating controls, whatever, and it's like this is the first time where I've literally sat down and been like, actually, this entire class of thing for us or for one of our partner teams or whatever is MAV of A, right?
Hmm.
And it's like I know it sounds dumb, right? Because it's like, oh, modified attack vector has always been there. You could have been using this for years, but it's like no one does. But also, what's fascinating too is like when you start to look at say CVSS4 and you see subsequent system impact or you see urgency, it's fascinating to see how many CVEs come in with a subsequent system impact or with urgency or with other attributes set. And it's like, you don't actually know the urgency. You're not the PPP. You're not the penultimate penultimate person setting this. You're not. You don't actually know where this lives, so you can't set the subsequent system impact, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, so we have the CVSS, we have the CVE. It's like, what do we actually do with this? So situating and contextualizing large classes of vulnerabilities is fascinating. It's just a ton of data, very interesting, and being able to push back and say like, well, actually, this CVSS comes in, it's junk, right? But it's nice to be able to provide that context automatically or more automatically to teams just by having a ton of data. So
Yeah.
I I I found it fascinating. Like I've known Jerry for years, and it's like he's always talked about this stuff, but like actually sitting down and looking at it, it's like, wow, this crap is actually like super fascinating, and more people should pay attention to it.
It is. I mean, I know there was that initial conference that they had, or they've had for the last couple of years. I'm trying to remember the name of it that Paul and Jerry were talking about, as far as like the vulnerability. I mean, it's really just about vulnerability classification and how that's actually happening, and like getting together the players that are in that space. Um, I've always found that interesting, like from a CVSS perspective, because I know the organizations that I've got a couple organizations that I work with that are very CVSS forward, even though their overall security programs aren't what I would consider to be overly mature. But being able to use CVSS to reclassify exploits and vulnerabilities is massive. It gives us an out that's like, hey, yeah, like we had a partner that came in and told us that this was, this exploit that they found by scanning our external web presence is a high severity, and it's got a CVSS score of 5.5 or whatever it is. And realistically, we go back and we just classify with MAV and some of those other modifiers and say, guys, no, this is our staging instance. There's no data there. Look, this is our modified CVSS score. And it's always, inevitably it's coming down to 1 or 0 in some cases because it's not classified, but at least it gives us that justification and that response, which is, like it's a great thing to have in your back pocket when you are dealing
Yes.
with vendors, when you're dealing with clients that don't that are using, I mean, they're giving you CVSS as it is, right?
Well, and you've heard me rant about this before. I particularly don't find CVSS useful for anything other than capturing certain levels of impact and maybe some details about what you consider the likelihood of something to be. And in reality, I think CVSS needs to be tied into the stakeholder specific vulnerability categorization, SSVC, and then
Yep.
use that to prioritize your actual vulnerabilities. And even just taking raw CVSS and running through for most systems, if you have some sort of like program or measure by which you actually take these systems, it's like you'll find that a lot of things that look scary out there are like track and track star, which are the
Yep.
two lowest prioritizations in SSVC. But again, we get this CVSS cups vulnerability that comes in, and legitimately interesting finding, legitimately overblown, right, in CVSS. But if you look at it with SSVC, even without some modifiers, and you have some program bubble wrap around it, it's like, oh, okay, this is actually a track star for us. We'll watch it.
Yep.
It's interesting, but we're probably not exposing cups to the internet, and we can do those sorts of things with MAV and then SSVC itself. So.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and okay, so Brian had a comment here. Hi, Brian. Thanks for listening. As
Well,
always,
and
we need to
Brian,
get you
it's
back
funny
on.
because
Yeah, he's
Brian and
dealing
I
with it.
did this. Brian and I did this years and years ago with Dave Wickers when OWASP 2013 was coming out, before Dave truly opened up the data collection process. So it's always funny to see Brian in these sorts of things, because we've been talking about it for like 12 years, 13
Yeah.
years. So
Again, this is where the nihilist comes out when it doesn't change over time. But,
yeah,
yeah, struggles with the whole that no one has a full holistic understanding of the vulnerabilities. So, yeah, I mean, just looking at the data that comes into the OWASP top 10, the contributions, what they see and what they view as a vulnerability, I'm sure varies across the board. Right?
well, there was one. Let me see if I can find it. 2025. Was it 3700? It was in. I'd have to find it, but it came in from the Polish CERT, right? So they're a computer emergency response team, and it was for medical equipment. And it's like, if you looked at it raw, it was like, wow, this sounds scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
This sounds terrible. And probably the Polish CERT was responding to something and gave their raw contextualized to them, but uncontextualized for the rest of us. And so they set a bunch of metrics on the CVSS score, and it's like, wow, this sounds scary. And it's like, if you read it, it's like, this doesn't sound scary at all. But it probably was scary in the context of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just, published the CVSS score with that, without us being able to measure anything else around it. Like, that's to Brian's point of like, I wish CWSS was more popular, because it's like weakness versus vulnerability. Like there's certain things that you would want to categorize there, but like CWSS does have quite a bit of information that I wish we had elsewhere.
Yeah. Yep. It's always it's a hard practice, right? Like I always, from a consulting perspective, as I'm trying to classify how risky a vulnerability is, or something that we find in an application. Some organizations want CVSS, some don't want CWSS, some just want the, whether how it's classified underneath the OWASP top 10. Others want like more of a qualitative approach. And then I always get pushback as well, right? Well, this is sitting on our like whatever system, and I'm like, really, I don't care, but my scope is so narrowly defined in most cases that I have to consider the worst case when
Yeah.
I'm writing my report. And I know that inflates vulnerabilities. We have discussions. We try to we release things in draft status. We allow them to respond and to mitigate. But the other thing that I struggle with is that mitigation of vulnerabilities does not always result in elimination of vulnerabilities. So yeah. Anyway, that's another topic, right? Like we can get into that. But I want to wrap, or I want to keep talking about the CVE data before we do that.
But I mean, I think to Bobby's question though, in chat too, CVEs themselves very frequently don't have enough data, or I wouldn't consider them having enough data. Like internally, I'm consuming from 20 to 25 different feeds, right, to enrich things. And I would struggle, and I think part of the problem is so frequently when we look at this, it's like you take from NVD, or you take from Inissa, or you take from whomever, you have some CVE, you get it from a scanner, you get it from your SAS tool, depth check, whatever, and then that's the thing, right? Like that's what most people end up getting is just the CVE ID and like some CVSS score. And it's like,
Yep.
that's not nearly enough information. It's like, is it weaponized? Is it being used by someone? Is it like, is there any information out there? And you don't have to go like buy Recorded Future or some, CTI vendor to tell you if it's being attacked. There's enough information out there to make educated guesses, but we're just not doing a lot of that sort of stuff right now, right? Like most people take a CVE from a scanner and then stick it in a report or stick it in a compliance finding or stick it in something and then require you to fix it based on a scary CVSS score, which isn't.
Yep. Yep. And yeah, I mean this all kind of goes back to program maturity and how organizations actually handle that data as it comes in. But it's also program maturity on the CVE side on what those different vendors will accept as CVEs, right? And I know that this is one area like we could probably talk for hours with Jerry on as far as like what that data, how clean and correct the data in those CVEs actually is, especially when it does have a CVSS score attached to it. So stuff gets overblown quite often, and we're crying wolf constantly for most organizations, right?
Yeah, we're crying wolf, but also I think the other problem is there's actually interesting, legitimate vulnerabilities that we're just not covering whatsoever, right? Because we're not actually considering chaining, we're not considering attacker position, we're not considering any of these sorts of things, and then we're just like, oh, okay, here's a scary cups vulnerability that you have to fix now because compliance said you had to fix all CVSS 10s or whatever, and it's like that's great, but there's actually a significantly more scary medium over here that we probably should fix. It's it's under active exploitation. It has a kev or whatever it is, and it's like we're not doing that though. And if you're not
Yeah.
familiar, Kev is CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities program, and I am exhausted, so please don't mind me if I'm like.
Yeah, here, I'll post up a link to
I got it too.
Kev's. Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, but it's like
Um, yeah.
I think a lot of times the other problem I see too is that vulnerabilities are seen as like a compliance challenge, right? Or they're seen as like just some busy work that you have to do, or they're seen as like the holy grail of what you want to get as an attacker, right? Like everyone wants to find a CVE that they can put on their resume, and it's like actually the reality is somewhere in between those two. It's like yes, there's compliance concerns, we should fix certain things, we should track them, but we need prioritization, we need contextualization, etc. But then also we need to like demystify the CVE program and make it less cool. Like it's normal. We all find 0 days. Like that's literally what we do, right? Like, but
All day long. Yeah.
right, literally. Like if you think about it, any vulnerability that you know about and no one else knows about is a 0 day. And I've said this
Yep.
on this program before, but it's like we have a tendency to almost fetishize those,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, and it kind of goes back to that idea of here we have like a infosec rock star that has
ugh,
like all this research that they do, all of these vulnerabilities that they've identified. They're on the leaderboards for all of the bug bounty programs. So
yeah,
obviously
good
that is, yeah,
segue.
that's the greatest, like, kudos, or that's the greatest hacker that's out there because they can do all of these things. Before we get into the bug bounty leaderboards stuff, though, the other thing that I wanted to call out from a CVE perspective is the tooling that goes into it, right? Like one of the things that I struggle with, and I know I struggle with in terms of clients as well, is the source of the vulnerability data itself, not even just a CVE that's known, but when they get flagged by various products and they have classifications and CVSS attached to them, the prioritization goes out the window
Yeah,
because this tool that was written 15 years ago found it's Nessus, it's Qualys, it's any of the vulnerability scanners that exist, whether that is app or network or whatever else. It has a specific rating that it attaches to a SQL injection vulnerability doesn't take any of that into context and is going to scream when it sees that, or when it sees an out of date, version of Apache. And all of that contributes to confusion, contributes to uh, wasted time and effort. Whoops, I copied the wrong one. Let me delete that. Wasted time and effort on, yeah, the part of the organization, and also from a tracking perspective when you start talking vendors and customers and everything else. Like, we've got these vendors that are out there, and I don't want to call any of them out by name, but do like public research into companies and then call out vulnerabilities, but they're calling out things that, yeah, they wrote the tool 20 years ago, right? They're looking for headers and other things that just don't come into play anymore, or
Mhm.
the risk is reduced so much, but they've never reclassified that from within their tool. And so I don't have a good like tool to use that like eliminates that outside of some sort of internal process to actually manage that as you're consuming the vulnerability data.
Yeah, I think the paper I posted is from Rand, right? It's a 1,000 days, zero days, excuse me, thousands of nights. It's a great paper, um, and it basically like classifies vulnerabilities based on nation state actors, presumably within the United States government, that Rand researchers worked with, right? So they're probably
Okay.
contractors, they're whatever, and they talked about the length of time that 0 days were 0 days, right? Like a lot of vulnerabilities live far longer than people expect. So it's very interesting to see how they start to classify like alive and dead is not useful because sometimes you can have something that's known, but the infrastructure lives in some place that it'll never be updated, right? It's all the things that we've talked about previously. Uh, but it's like it's probably one of my favorite papers, and it's almost 10 years old now, if I recall correctly. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like that that sort of like research into the context there. Yeah, 2017, right? So it's like that sort of research into the context and how long these things live and where they're situated is just not generally done in our community, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so you say that like a lot of people struggle with it, or like, Brian mentioned that tools, that he gets all sorts of data from all sorts of different vendors, or Bobby's point of like, is CVE enough? And it's like, well, no one's actually studying this either.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, some of this, I don't know, the last couple of years, right? So to push our conversation from, strict CVE into the AI realm and LLMs, um, this idea of context, right? Being able to think about all of the all of these sorts of aspects of a vulnerability and an exploit that exists, and whether or not it needs to be prioritized for an organization, feels purpose built for LLMs, and like especially the reasoning LLMs, if you can give it enough context about where this vulnerability exists, what the environment looks like, and we can actually not necessarily short circuit, but supplement the research, or the red team or the defender, the blue team, as they're trying to classify what work needs to get done. Is that something that you're starting to see? And who and where?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see more and more. Like Jerry released the MCP for vulnerability data. I think we need to see these sorts of things. There's definitely LLMs that are like ingesting NIST, right, to make it more approachable. You don't need weirdos with NIST tattoos to tell you all the NIST documents anymore. There's that sort of thing happening. But I do think that the context is going to be interesting for LLMs there. There's such a huge amount of stuff to do, right? And to think. I'm going to be very interested to see how we get like the classic notion of like expert systems. Like how do we encode what an expert does. How do we do knowledge engineering? This is like all 80s good old fashioned AI stuff. But how do we do like knowledge engineering to capture things and then tie it in with, machine learning, spicy linear regression, whatever it is, and sort of, actually extract useful deterministic things here. I think that'll be very fascinating to watch, and it's incredible to see where LLMs have come. Right, like I was joking with you. I talked with a VC, and they were asking me about some of the stuff, and I'm like, well, you're going to need a huge amount of context, and you're going to need some sort of thing that like holds vulnerabilities and can like feed back and forth with the LLM and whatnot. And it was like, oh, MCP, agentic AI, all these sorts of things. It's like, I should have said nothing. I should have just like taken those ideas and been like, that's an interesting question, and then gone off and done something about it, right? But it was like, that's like, we've made huge amount of progress, and there's like really interesting work being done to, in the vulnerability research space, in the vulnerability data space, and I think it's only going to get better, obviously, or democratized there.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
going to be a huge win for us.
It is. And I mean, one of the things that I've been talking about, I mean, obviously we're using LLMs. We're starting to supplement our own internal process as we do security analysis, right? Like that's something that is almost a given, and I feel like is coming in my space, in our space specifically, very quickly. We see what Ken's doing over at Dry Run on the code side. And then we see this from Expo today, and I think it was Andrew that actually posted this in one of our Slacks. But
One
I'll
of the
post
many.
Yeah, but we've got Expo touting the fact that their AI, their engine, is now outperforming. It's the top hacker in the United States on HackerOne, right? Or Hacker X0x0.
But
Yeah,
I do think we're going to see automation take over a lot of the like low hanging fruit things. I struggle with this, right? Like, because there's a lot of people who are like, no one will be coding in 6 months. Everything will be written by AI, and it's like, well, clearly that's like Steve Klabnik had a great point on this. Like, there's a middle ground here. There's a lot of doomerism, and there's a lot of like naysayers of AI, and rightfully so. But I think there's also a lot of people who are like absolutely hyped about it, and it's like it's going to be somewhere in the middle. But I do think it's going to be fascinating to see how people are starting to work with AI as a coworker. And I keep saying AI, but I mean LLMs currently, agentic, whatever. But I think it'll be fascinating to see how people will start to use this. And we're going to be having sort of a folksonomy, right? We don't have a strict taxonomy. We don't have ontology management. We don't, like, if you're old like us and you've dealt with like AI stuff before, or knowledge management before, it's like, this is all the stuff that they used to talk about. Knowledge engineering, right? KEEs, the sort of like good old fashioned AI stuff there. It's like, we're getting there, but I think we're getting there not holistically, not via ontology, but via like folksonomy, where like people are getting good at writing prompts for a specific LLM for a specific task, and they're sort of working on it there. It's still very freeform. We're in the earlier stages of this sort of thing. You know what I mean?
yeah. Oh no, I do, right? Like, because that's where I find myself spending my time. Is and to Andrew's point as well, like we may have to have him on to have some discussion about, how to actually codify what you and I and he, the rest of the industry has learned over time into an LLM requires quite a bit of nuance and prompt engineering in order to get good results out. And I think you're seeing that over time with Expo as well. Initially it was like, yeah, go find this one thing. All right, how do you actually automate that so it can be done at a larger scale? Most of that is going to be tuning and prompt engineering and like classification, but they still have the expertise somewhere to actually exploit those vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you couldn't you wouldn't know what test to write. You wouldn't know how to approach an LLM and uh, start the conversation about identifying these issues without some sort of context that you've built over time. Um, yeah.
Well, that's Bobby's point, right? Is like LLMs are not going to be everything, and anyone
Hmm.
who are pushing LLMs only likely has to stand for a lot of money. Like what Ken's done with Dry Run is obviously encoding a lot of things, providing a lot of context via RAG and MCP, et cetera, whatever. And I think we're going to have a lot of really interesting contextual information crossed around. But I do agree, like there'll be no coders or no programmers, and everyone like that sort of end game is ridiculous, right? To say nothing of the morals or the economics of that. It's like it's clearly not going to be 6 months to that, you know.
No, yeah, and Brian's right here, right? LLM probably works better in medical or academic spaces that are mature and highly structured because we are
Yes.
not, right? Like output of tools is, yeah. You just look at the CVE data, right? Like,
I mean, yeah. Look at
yeah,
CVSS. I was just thinking, like, try to describe a vulnerability from first principles, and it's like most people are going to struggle. Like, how do you classify XSS? Like, just have a discussion with the team, and you will probably figure out that XSS or any vulnerability, any injection vulnerability, like most people have some different mental model of where that fits, and they'll have some folksonomy of it. But actually describing it as a class of things, most people are going to struggle with that.
mhm.
It's like we're not a formal discipline. We're not an area there. Although it is horrifying to think that medicine might be a good space for LLMs. That's how you get. There's an old-fashioned AI talk about how there was an expert system that was great at diagnosing cancer. It's awesome. I'd have to find it, but it was great at diagnosing cancer. Had all the questions, all the things that a doctor would have to run you through. And it was so good at diagnosing cancer that it would diagnose tires as having cancer. And it's like, it's interesting, right? Like we can sort of build a lot of these sorts of things. We have taxonomies and whatnot, but like we also need to still have humans in the loop there to apply something, some sort of like reasonable context there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to read that article because
I have
I
to
mean we
find
get a
it.
lot of that. Yeah. And I mean, this kind of goes back to that idea of, okay, we talk about AI, we talk about like automated systems. That is like LLMs, large language models, are one aspect of that, right? And the way that they actually operate is partially what we're learning right now. How to feed it and get results out, validate that the math behind it is actually correct, and we didn't go too creative. We didn't go, we didn't allow for the right amount of connections in order to get the results that we wanted out of that to make it more deterministic. And that being said, the creativity feeds pretty well into some of the vulnerability identification and being able to think a little bit outside the box for, I mean, something as simple as identifying payloads for cross-site scripting, right? Like, to go back to your example, that is purpose built, or it feels pretty purpose built for an LLM to be able to make those sorts of calls and really go after an input for a web application to identify those things. And I think that's where Expo is having, or Crossbow, whatever you want to call it, is having that success, right? Is, hey, LLMs are good at these very specific things, and as long as we can validate and we can put some structure around it, it is going to be successful in improving the security of these systems.
Well, I worked with Max Schaefer somewhat closely when he was still at GitHub and I was still at GitHub, and
Hmm.
he did some really interesting work on like classifiers, right? So
Okay.
he did some interesting research with a student researcher on like classifying things. They used CART, which is a regression tree mechanism for it, and it was fascinating to see like randomized regression trees and whatnot, how well they work for classification. So I think obviously I don't know what Crossbow or Expo is doing, but um, I think they're probably building quite a bit of machinery around context development, right? Because
Mhm.
that was Max's expertise there. He's very good at classifier and classification systems, and so automatically building a lot of that context based off of whatever they're doing. And again, I have no internal knowledge of what they're doing, but I can surmise based on Nico and Max working there. Um, they're probably building up quite a bit of context before you even get to the LLM, and they're using machine learning, other machine learning, good old fashioned machine learning, to sort of
Mhm.
classify things. And I think that's probably the level that most people are going to have to get to eventually if they want these things to be like truly autonomous or really a partner. Is like there's context, there's classification, then the LLM kicks in. It uses a RAG and an MCP to keep things whatever. Um, it's that sort of like there's a system around the LLM, not just we're throwing stuff at a spicy text completion engine.
Yeah. Well, and that's what you see, right? Like discussions with Ken, the stuff that we've been building internally, it's all about the tooling, the validation that's going on. And Andrew actually has a good recommendation on actual production usage of LM and AI machine learning engineering in action. That he said that he's read. He says it's more about general engineering principles applied to AI rather than just, hey, I'm building a prompt and I'm getting it to say X, Y, and Z. It almost feels like in the talks that I've done, the research that I've done, the ability to get the LLM to give you a response that you want is pretty basic, right? It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
easy because natural language goes into it. It understands that. But the second that you want to turn that into a full on product that can do that reliably time and time again, that's where the rubber hits the road and it's more difficult to actually implement, right?
There's a paper. I'd have to find it. It was on lobsters, but someone actually did it. It was like a company that they did a study of like how certain classes of senior engineers were much more successful with LLMs than others. And the thing that they found was that those senior engineers were much more used to writing specifications
Mm-hmm.
and expressing themselves textually and verbally to other people, juniors or others, and really laying things out. So when you say like, oh, it's easy, like it's natural language, it's fascinating because I think, and Bobby and Brian and you have seen my editing previously. I think most engineers struggle with that sort of communication. We sort of let the humanities go, and sort of writing down your ideas is hard. It's hard for people. It's a humanities thing. It's not and I hate soft skill. That's such a bad term. But uh, yeah, as Bobby said, he's received my edits.
Yes.
I apologized to my real estate lawyer recently for my edits. So, but you know, it's like I think a lot of people struggle with it, so they just see this thing. It's like, oh, you put English in and you get code out, and it's like, well, in theory, yes, but there's also a lot of steps in between English and there. Besides being able to see the results and wrestle with them, it's like you have to be able to express yourself, and I
Yeah.
think it's difficult to do for many people, and it's a different skill, a different set of skills than we're used to.
No, and I will. I'll dig back through lobsters and find that article and we'll post it because that's what I've been saying for a while. And as you start to look at the prompts that are very effective, like the cursor prompt, like the windsurf one that was, that have been exposed, right? Or, dropped onto GitHub. That's what it goes back to. A lot of the layout of exactly what you're expecting, what the inputs should be, what the outputs should be, like what, some examples of each of that. And when we tie that back to, okay, now we have this AI term of few shot prompts, right? Oh, okay. Like we've been writing specifications in that way for a while. And it kind of goes back to exactly to your point, to that maturity of the engineers themselves and how they're actually building that code, or the maturity of an organization. Yeah, it's an undervalued skill for sure, but now it may be overvalued, right?
Well,
If we can really, if those people are more effective at writing those prompts, that's who we're going to start to hire.
yeah, and it's like one of those things where I'm looking through. I'm like 4 pages back into the vibe coding
Yeah,
uh, tag. I'll find it and post it. But I do think a lot of the and don't get me wrong, I'm not someone who lives in an AI. I have like LLM tools installed. I play with them locally, but I'm not like LLM pilled at all.
hmm
I understand the skepticism. I understand a lot of the ethical dilemmas that are presented here. But I do think a lot of the complete disregard areas are like, well, this is here. We have to figure out how to wrestle with it. Because also, pretty much everyone who listens to this podcast is probably going to have to secure this nonsense also too, which is the
yeah,
other part. The really concerning side of it is like we're going to have all the bad the bad stuff come out of it soon too. I I keep joking. I'm waiting for CVSS. Like I'm waiting for automatically generated CVSS nonsense to come around. And that's just like completely divorced from reality. And it's like I we see it and it's like how are we going to know that this is like that's the security Turing test is like is this CV can I tell that this CVSS was terrible because a human wrote it and didn't understand or terrible because a AI wrote it and didn't understand. That'll be my point where I just give up there.
a
you know?
security Turing test.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen tools generate CVSS using LLMs yet, right? You know that it's going to be coming. Um, wow, and I'm not sure how you get good scores out of that again without the context. I keep thinking back to Daniel Miesler and his idea of like building context for different systems, different objects and organizations, and maintaining that, making sure that your AI has access to it before you do anything else, right?
Yes.
Because it makes it so much more relevant that like it makes it similar to what you would do in your own life and in your own mental models for threat, for, relevant information to you as a person, that without it, LMs feel pretty basic.
Well, and I think it's fascinating because if you look at vibe coding, right, and I don't mean that derisively, right? Like that's the term that people are using. If you look at vibe coding, um, I think you see a lot of like I built a CRUD app and it's super easy. But what I thought is fascinating is Hillel Wayne. He's like a big TLA plus person. If you're into formal verification, formal specification, he's there, and he's actually said that LLMs are great, right? Because it's like you have these weird systems that can wrestle with other weird systems, and you can sort of talk to them in English and get plus cal or TLA plus or some formal verification system code out the other side, and it's a huge game changer. And it's like, wow, it's like it's interesting. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out here, but I think a lot of the examples are just like, I wrote a crappy, CRUD application in 30 seconds and look at it. It's localhost port 3000. It's super cool. Like, you know, there's some happy medium between the two of like, we hate this. It's dumb. And like, this is going to change everything. No one will be coding and we'll all be, like peasants in idiocracy, So,
It's, I mean, you got to take it all with a grain of salt for sure, right? I know there was some discussion, to that point on like the technical debt, um, that is coming out of AI in general, right? And vibe coding along that, right? Along those lines, that when engineers are vibe coding, they are creating technical debt
mhm.
that may or may not get solved or even identified during those phases if we don't have some sort of guardrails or maturity around that process.
I hate to be that person, but having worked internally at large companies, I have to burst everyone's bubble that this is happening continuously, whether or not you have LLMs there. People are copying and pasting from Stack Overflow previously. They're not doing a lot of the things here. And I think what we're really seeing is what you said, Seth. There's a lack of maturity. We don't really understand the code that we're putting in here. And I don't think we need to go like Thomas Potacek, like all my AI skeptical friends are nuts. Just read the code, right? There's clearly some issue with just reading the code. But I also think like this is happening anyway. Like developers are generating technical debt every single day, and AI maybe accelerates them, maybe doesn't, but it certainly is happening anyway. So it's like we sort of have to wrestle with where we're at rather than where we wish we would be.
Mm-hmm. And the cat's out of the bag as far as AI usage, right? Across the general population, not even just in security. Yeah, like everybody's using it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I don't actually use non-local LLMs really at all, right? But it's like I do think we need to probably have some sort of like understanding of what we're getting into and some sort of like processes around it. But just like with CVSS, it's like, unless someone actually sits down and contextualizes and does some work and wrestles with the problem, we're going to get a lot of slop.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just inevitable, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we start talking about AI slop and what's actually being generated for social media in general or code, right, from a vibe coding perspective, and there are massive amounts of that. I could even, John Oliver talked about AI slop, right? Like there is real discussions going on in media across the world as far as how do we respond to this? How do we know? And how do we help the people that are not in our world actually identify what is AI slop? Like, my, mother-in-law or whatever, right? Like very difficult for someone that isn't doing that on a daily basis or dealing with it on a daily basis to identify what is AI slop, or engineering managers that have been doing waterfall for the past 30 years. Are they really going to know that this code came from AI and maybe needs a deeper investigation than the other pull requests that are in their queue, right? Like that sort of analysis is not something that we're necessarily that good at right now.
Well, yeah, we weren't good at it before either, though.
No, I
Like,
mean we
you
weren't,
know,
but now it's like the amount of vibe coding, the amount of technical debt, the amount of slop that's coming in via these channels has just increased because, right, like Copilot does make engineers what, 3 times, 5 times more effective.
yeah, it depends on language, and that's the sort of thing too. Is like, I think what we'll see is convergence on platform in some way, right? It's like the delve. There's like a list of 12 words that OpenAI is fairly fond of using, right? Delve is one of them and whatnot. And so one of the ways that people compare if a paper is written by AI is they look for words that someone never used previously. And then all of a sudden, all of their papers is like, let's delve into the topic. Yeah, I think we're really going to struggle with the societal aspects of things, right? That's why earlier I said like ignoring the ethical and moral dilemmas that come out of these sorts of things. But we are terrible at harm reduction to begin with, right? Like we've done effectively none of it for social media. We've done none of it, so it's like, yes, we will still have harm reduction and abuse issues, wide and far. So yeah, we're in for a bad time in some ways. But like for coding and for security, it's going to be another tool in our tool belt here, right? It's like I always liken it to when I was in college. There was this push to like not have anyone learn coding anymore. It's like we're just going to outsource. We're never going to do any of this coding again. And it's like clearly that didn't work out the way we have it. Uh, I suspect we'll still have the same number of jobs. They might be different. They might work differently. I'm concerned for juniors
Hmm.
in our field, but in terms of like we're going to get rid of things, that's not what I'm concerned about. I'm more concerned about what we were just talking about, slop, and how people recognize things and trusted sources and blah 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 blah.
Yeah, the more that we abstract what's going on underneath the hood, the harder it is to identify those issues, especially for juniors as they're coming into the space, right? Um, but on the flip side, I want them to be able to learn and use those tools effectively. And man, if you can have ChatGPT or Gemini actually troubleshoot your code, why wouldn't you, right? Um, yes, there is something to be said for learning how to troubleshoot, how to actually put, real thought into it to run a compiler and to get messages back out and, everything that goes into that process. But from a business perspective, yeah, I have a hard time arguing with, wow, it only took me 30 seconds to identify this using Gemini, or it was a 2-day process to figure out that I had a memory corruption issue over here, right? Like, uh, yeah,
Well,
I,
it's like you and I were talking before this of like, well, like I used to come on the show and talk about symbolic
mhm,
execution and everything, and it's like I think there's still going to be a space for those sorts of things, right? Like we're not going to get rid of these techniques. Being able to know the basics is going to be useful. How society actually like onboards people and whatnot is always going to be is going to be the problem continuously, right? But I don't think we're not going to get rid of symbolic execution, concolic execution. We're not going to get rid of those like higher ends of testing, but maybe people won't have to remember how invoke Framacy next time in order to do it,
mhm,
right? Like it'll be a little bit more accessible. Of course, if it hallucinates a problem, that's something else. But it's like there's really going to be a lot of things that are hopefully democratized or a little bit easier. It's it's like when you used to give people interviews and it's like use the man page. I don't need you to know all of the switches to Nmap. And it's like,
mhm.
okay, at some point we're going to have to wrestle with it, but that's not the problem I have to worry about just now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I like to, it's Robert's point as well, right? Like this is a bit of chaotic good because it does make things more approachable. The next generation is growing up with these tools. They're going to be able to do things with them that we can't imagine right now because of the possibilities and the ability it gives them to think outside the box and to push push that exploration further, right?
I Bobby knows where I'm going to go with this, but
Okay.
if you look at like human computer interface studies, right, and you look at digital natives versus people who onboarded they were not digital native, there's actually no there's no religious dogma that people are going to get more good at these things. We still need digital literacy. We still need like LLM literacy. We still need numeracy, right? Like people are still bad at numbers, and and if you're bad at numbers and no one teaches you numeracy and no one teaches you like to be better at numbers, an LLM is just going to be that, right? It's just going to be a thing that you don't understand. It's like when your teacher used to tell you you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket all the time. It's like in some points that's funny and stupid. We all have mini supercomputers now, but it's like if you still calculate the wrong thing and don't know what you're doing, we're going to have a bad time regardless. And it's like that.
Mhm.
I wish we would like I wish a lot of the discussion would go around numeracy, literacy, and understanding processing, because digital native actually doesn't, right? That's how you get
Yeah.
so many kids who can like start YouTube and watch Skibidi Toilet or whatever and can't could in no way, shape, or form come up with anything creative themselves. Being digital native actually doesn't imply any sort of like actual understanding of what's happening there. You can just poke at things here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think where I go, and I think probably what Robert's talking about are the people that do push those envelopes and are that want to understand what's going on, them being digital native on top of having that understanding is going to allow them to reach further than you or I can right now because it didn't exist as we were coming up. We were forced to use the pathways that were available to us, and God forbid, like Java, UIs, right? Like, that sort of thing that did limit what we could actually get access to. And I go back, I keep thinking about the talk that I gave, 2014, like the sputter stuff that,
Oh yeah.
generating like payloads and trying to identify flaws very quickly, short circuiting that. Some of that is still relevant, and I want to revisit it because I could do that so much quicker with ease of use and the tools that are available now than what I was trying to code back then, right? The exploration of payloads and execution and formal specification and like generating all of that was a very manual process, and nowadays it'd be a lot easier to do.
It it's funny too though. I do think this a lot of this is like, I said we'll have a convergence problem. Like Thomas Patachek and his all of my AI skeptic friends are nuts. He talks about how Go is great for LLMs because it's very repetitive. There's a lot of things that you would do over and over again, and Rust isn't as good because it doesn't have that like that sort of blocky, repetitive notion that Go has. But it's also funny to just consider that like we're in for that sort of ride of where like we'll see Delve appear in papers, we'll see tools and things appear, and it'll be fascinating to watch how those trends grow. I just hope that we're actually prepared for, like, if I am being doomerish about it, it's more of that we're not prepared to actually do the literacy work. We're not prepared to do the
Oh
numeracy
yeah,
work. We're
no,
just screwed on that front, you know?
no, yeah, we're not, right? Like there's no pathway to do that. And I think that's what I kind of get back to is I'm like, okay, you and I have kids, right? Like
Yep.
how do we get them to this point, right? Like what do I turn them onto that will light that fire so they have that understanding, or at least give them that base level knowledge set that will allow them to manipulate these tools in a manner that is appropriate. Um, yeah, we
Well,
got we got yeah.
I think it's to the point that's in chat is like the fundamentals are still always going to be the same, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like when I was in school and everyone was like, "Don't learn to code," and it's like, well, maybe don't learn Java only per se, learn fundamentals. But I think that's always going to be true. Is like learning the fundamentals, having literacy about it will be a huge win there. I I just yeah, it it's going to be an interesting time for a lot of other reasons there. There's a book, Nihilist Communism, or a critique of the religious dogma on the left of the triumph of good over evil or something like that. I
Mhm.
have to bring nihilism into one of these talks at some point, and I feel very much like that critique, the nihilist communist critique, is very active here. Like there's no there's no specific outcome that is going to come from this unless we like actually wrestle with these problems and actually try to deal with them, right?
Yeah.
It's my security nihilism for LLMs there, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Just you know, so
Well, I mean, people are people. That stuff doesn't change, right? Like there's no indications that we're going to approach this any better than we approached any of the other large scale like shifts in technology in human existence, right?
yeah,
Um, there's
or
not.
negative externalities, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like blockchains still exist, you know.
Yes, yes, it does.
You know. But
Well,
to
yeah.
to Bobby's point, just as a wrap up though, like, will we see languages that are LLM specific or things like that? I, I don't know. I sort of wonder about it. I do wonder if it's like, because I always struggle with LLMs, right? It's like it's a very expensive way of getting gherkins, like the
Mhm.
Qt test, right? Of like, I want to write in some structured way in English and then get code out of it or get tests out of it or whatever. So it's like, I feel like a lot of the LLM space is like, oh, we just suck at formal specification, so we're just going to like spend a ton of money to not do that. But I do think eventually we'll maybe not necessarily see a language specifically for LLMs, but I do suspect we'll see a lot of dialecting. You'll see like, this is what Claude writes for Go. This is OpenAI's Go or whatever. whatever language here, we're going to maybe see convergences along those lines rather than like an LLM language here. There are attempts like Darklang has gone LLM. There's a few programming languages that are like, we're LLM native, whatever that means. So there are languages that are trying to do this. I haven't seen them really break out into something that I would care about just yet. It's not impossible, but a lot of it is like, yeah, it's neat. You integrated LLMs really closely to the language. It works well with the compiler, but is it something that's like novel? Not particularly. Not particularly compared to like what Claude Code does or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, interesting. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's been an hour. I know that you and I will continue this conversation
Yeah.
as we always do. Or if you're listening, would like to continue the conversation, jump into Slack. I know Andrew and a couple other people are in there, and we've been going back and forth on various things as we've posted today. Yeah, any final thoughts? Any way to put a bow on what we've talked about today, whether CVEs or use of LLM, nihilism in general?
I think people should reach out to Andrew on on Slack with all their hot takes for
Yes.
LLMs. Just absolutely inundate him with that. No, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in the space. I think the bow I might put on it is going to be context matters. We as humans sort of suck at specifying things and suck at the like laying out your thought process and your priors and where you want to go from there. And LLMs will suffer or succeed based on that, based on your ability to express, but also it's just the same for CVEs or any other things. The context and your ability to reason about it will be the determinant there always. So.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, that's what I'm going to put on the title
yeah,
for the episode.
Matters.
Context matters. Yep. We've heard that before. We talked about it before, but it absolutely does, right?
It's NIST 830, right? Like you have to have your system context and your business context and your organizational context, and it's the pyramid of context.
Pyramid of context. Is that like Ron Swanson's pyramid of great? I can't. Whatever. Right? Yeah. We'll build one of those. Like that'll be
David Bianco's pyramid of pain.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Like whatever it is.
It's one of
awesome. Well, thanks so much for helping me with the podcast this week. People can find you on Slack. What's the easiest way they can
Slack is the easiest. Okay. I don't really do social media too much anymore. It's like there's so much else going on that I'm in. So Slack is definitely the easiest for me. If you want to you can also send your hate mail to Andrew.
I like how you keep throwing Andrew under the bus on this one, man.
No, because Andrew and I talk about it quite a bit, and it's very interesting. So it's just like I think there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had there. So
yeah, he's doing a lot of academic research along these things, along these lines. So it does come up quite often.
It is actually very interesting. Yeah,
it is very interesting. So. Well, good. Well, thanks to everyone that has listened today, or is listening, or will listen. And we'll probably be back to our regularly scheduled podcast episodes next week. Thanks to Stefan for joining me.
Of course.
And otherwise, we will see everybody online. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.